This is Jeffrey Jackson on the left here. He is a governing body member of Jehovah's Witnesses. He was called to testify in front of the Australian Royal Commission on Jehovah's Witnesses' treatment of child mistreatment cases, or CSA cases, if you catch my drift. Trying to say this in a polite way. They have completely bungled the way that they handled it in every way, criminally in my opinion. And the court's opinion, too, actually, because, well, at the very least, they've bungled it because they've been awarded tens of millions of dollars for how they handled cases of child mistreatment within the church. Now, when he was called to testify in front of the Australian Royal Commission, he put his hand on his version of the Bible, the New World Translation of the Holy Scriptures, and he looked them square in the eye and he said, "I swear to God, I will not lie. I will tell the whole complete truth in this meeting." And what did he do? He lied. He walked into this meeting with them and blatantly, bald-faced, lied to them. This is actually part 2. If you haven't seen part 1, don't sweat it. This stands independently of the rest. I'll provide context if it's missing. But I wanted to listen to what he had to say in this meeting. He's told one lie, to my knowledge, so far. Leading up to this point, they're just kind of trying to establish like how the religion operates, what an anointed person is, stuff like that. It's just kind of routine stuff. So let's listen to what old Jeffrey Jackson has to say here for himself.
So in paragraph 1, it says that the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses is made up of brothers who are anointed servants of Jehovah God. I take it that is how you see it, and that's in the manner you've explained.
So they're still kind of trying to establish like the procedure, how all of this stuff works generally, and how the governing body is structured and stuff. I'll explain it as we go through if we need more information.
Minutes ago.
That's correct.
And then it said that they have the responsibility for giving direction and impetus to the kingdom work, and some scriptures are given. I take it that is how you see it.
That is correct.
And it also then says, like its first century counterpart, the governing body today looks to Jehovah, the universal sovereign, and to Jesus Christ, the head of the congregation, for direction in all matters. Would that be how you see it?
That's correct, yes.
So basically they're saying, do you believe that you get your direction from God himself? That's really the question being asked here, right? Do you get your direction directly from God as a governing body member, as an anointed person, somebody who claims to be one of very few people on earth who can receive divine prophecy from God himself? Do you believe that you receive that prophecy and that God is, kind of forming out the way that the organization operates? And he says yes.
And then in paragraph 2, it says in the second sentence, the governing body, I beg your pardon.
Pardon begged. I guess he begged for my pardon, so pardon supplied. You may receive my pardon. You're welcome.
In the first sentence, the Bible says, with reference to 1 Corinthians 14, verse 40.
1 Corinthians. Oh my God, this dude is like Donald Trump. 2 Corinthians walk into a bar. That's crazy. What is this like? Something that's really common among certain like denominations or something? Like people pronounce it differently. They say 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians rather than 1st and 2nd Corinthians, the way that most people say it. Super weird, right?
Let all things take place decently and by arrangement, and that the governing body obeys this direction by putting in place various helpful procedures and guidelines that ensure the smooth and orderly operation of the branch offices and congregations. Now, from that, are we to understand that the procedures and guidelines that are published by the Jehovah's Witnesses, in particular the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of Pennsylvania, are the procedures and guidelines referred to here?
if I understand your question correctly, Mr. Stewart, if I could just explain, as it highlights here, there is a responsibility of the governing body, and may I remind you that you're quoting from a publication that is not a constitution, is not a legal document, is not a contract. It is an expression of the relationship and responsibilities between the governing body and the branch committee. So in this paragraph, we are highlighting to the branch committees the responsibility that we feel that there is a need, yes, for certain procedures and for certain direction to be given in a spiritual nature.
Right. So here's the thing with the governing body and everything. Here's what just happened. Jeffrey Jackson claimed that the governing body does have a constitution, and that constitution is the Bible. You know, almost, I would say every single like nonprofit or organization of any type has like a constitution or bylaws or whatever. In fact, to my knowledge, they are legally required to in almost every case. But they claim that their constitution is the Bible. Now, that's simply absurd. There are most definitely like procedural things about how the organization is supposed to operate that are written down. Like, even if it's only in the event like all 7 of the governing body, or 8 or however many governing body members like get in a car accident, you know, the next guy in line would be able to like take over and assist, right? So this guy, like the prosecutor or the questioner or whatever, is asking, I guess he's quoting from one of their like documents that he got his hands on. And he's saying, is this not like your constitution? Isn't this how this operates? And he's like, oh, no, that's not a constitution, I swear. It's like he's refusing to accept and just admit to anything. Just come out and explain it if we're wrong about something, you know?
And from the next sentence, responsible Christian men do their part by setting an example of obedience as they put such arrangements into effect. Are we to understand that the expectation of the governing body is that the branches around the world will act in accordance with those procedures and guidelines?
That is the expectation, but may I put the proviso on this? You see, as the paragraph 2 starts off, the second sentence, the governing body obeys this direction. Mr. Stewart, what you need to understand with regard to our organization is a faith-driven organization. This is not an organization of lawyers or those that are...
Complete nonsense. Of course they have lawyers and stuff. So he's trying to pretend that they don't have like bylaws or explanations for how anything should run. That's completely made up. Of course they do. And I believe that this guy got his hands on some of this stuff. Again, even if it's simply because somebody could, you know, gets in a car accident and dies in the middle of the night or whatever, of course they would have an explanation for how things should continue on to run. Of course they would. It's absurd to think that they, you know, it's absurd that he's like seeming to try to convince the people around him right now that they don't have like bylaws and explanations and stuff. Like, come on. How gullible do you think we are, really?
Not an organization of lawyers or those that are overly concerned with legal matters.
That's weird because they're constantly in and out of court. A matter of fact, for the first time, I think they hired outside counsel to handle something. I heard that was the case. I don't know if it's true or not. Almost always, they hire counsel from within. Like, they're not even hiring counsel. It's just like they have lawyers that work for them at Bethel, at their cult compound. And, you know, the Bethel lawyers are arguing those cases and sending in amicus briefs and stuff.
So our primary allegiance is to Jehovah God. Now, the governing body realizes that if we were to give some direction that is not in harmony with God's word, all of Jehovah's Witnesses worldwide who have the Bible would notice that. And they
have. Lots of Jehovah's Witnesses worldwide have noticed your ass-backwards position on blood transfusions, or your backwards position on, I don't know, shunning. Lots of them have, and they left because they realize you're not really God's organization, but you've continued to deceive millions despite that fact.
Jehovah's Witnesses worldwide who have the Bible would notice that, and they would see that it was wrong direction.
There's no correction method to be had here, though. That's one of the big problems. There's no way to fix it. You know, what if you are wrong? What do you do if you're wrong? As a governing body member, how do you determine that you're wrong? He's laying out a corrective method right now, when in reality, there is no corrective method. If you contradict something about the governing body or you question them on something, you know what happens? They disfellowship you. Here's an example. They are simply, absolutely, and completely wrong on their position that Babylon fell, or the temple fell, in 607 BCE. It did not. It fell in 587. But they refuse to accept the fact that they're wrong on this. You know why? Because it would completely alter the way that their whole system works. They'd have to change their prophecies around and everything. It would lead to absurdity. So despite the fact that they're absolutely wrong about this, they will not retract it. They're acting like there's some method to correct the problem. There isn't. There's no built-in thing, no built-in protection against them being wrong.
So we have a responsibility as guardians to make sure that everything is scripturally acceptable. So if the direction given is scripturally correct, then we would expect that these members of the branch committee, who themselves also are Christians who accept the Constitution, would follow that direction. But if I can also say, there are provisions for those branch committees to get back to us if they see that there's something that doesn't work, and then we can adjust it accordingly.
Okay, I don't think that's true. There are provisions to allow people to get back to the governing body and explain a problem. Then why are there so many problems that are left uncorrected to this point?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Jackson. I'll come to the question of adjustments and so on in a moment, but from what you've said, am I to understand that the governing body seeks to obey Jehovah God?
Absolutely.
And that the branches seek to obey the governing body?
First of all, the branches seek to obey Jehovah. We're all in the same arrangement.
Yeah, except you claim to speak for Jehovah. That's the thing.
But because they recognize a central body of spiritual men who give spiritual direction, then we would assume that they would follow that direction, or if something is not appropriate, that they would identify that.
And in turn, the congregations are expected to obey the branches.
Again, first of all, they have to obey Jehovah God. That is the very first thing.
And you speak for him. They're desperate to reframe this to be something other than what it is, which is Jehovah's Witnesses being mandated to listen to and follow the direction, every direction that this guy provides, no matter how wrong it is. Even if it gets you killed, you must follow it. And if you don't, you'll lose your friends and family for the rest of your life.
That they need to do. But if direction is given based on the Bible, we would expect that they would follow that because of their respect of the Bible.
And the definitive interpretation of the Bible from time to time is the governing body. Is that right?
That's correct, yes. The Bible is interpreted by the governing body, and if you don't like their interpretation, then you're just wrong. Like, I have no investment in this, okay? I'm atheist. I don't care what the Bible has to say about this or that. If the Bible says something I disagree with, I just say it's wrong. I don't try to justify it. But I can tell you, the Bible does not support shunning. Jehovah's Witnesses misinterpret a verse to make it seem as though the Bible does support shunning. There's a verse in 1 Corinthians, I think it was Paul, was talking to one of the congregations. The congregations asked Paul, what do we do? Somebody just broke a rule. How do we correct this? Like, what do we do about this? And Paul says, shun him. Don't even dine with such a man. The Corinthian congregation wrote a letter back and said, this is insane. It's overly harsh. We don't want to do this. We don't like this. We want to fix this problem. Kind of the process that Jeffrey Jackson is describing here, come to think of it. A corrective process that Jehovah's Witnesses can come in and, tell their religious leader that they think that this isn't what God wants. I think you're wrong. That's exactly what happened with Paul in shunning. And Paul, in his second letter to the Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, says, you know what? You're right. You're right. That was overly harsh. We shouldn't be shunning. We should be bringing him into the fold, working with him, trying to help him find his way, and stuff like that. So Jehovah's Witnesses take that first verse, 1 Corinthians, where it says, don't even dine with such a man who, breaks the rules. And they zero in on it and say, yeah, this is the one that we believe. This is the one we agree with. We like this the best. Completely ignoring his follow-up to that verse that says, I'm sorry, just forget it. That was wrong. The Bible doesn't support shunning. Prime example of Jeffrey Jackson and the rest of the governing body getting it wrong, claiming to have some special insight, hear the voice of God that you can't hear. And they get it wrong. They misinterpreted. You know their excuse for that? Well, we hear the voice of God and you don't. And God told us that even though the Bible is not in support of shunning, God told us that he is. So you just got to accept it for what it is. Absurd. Absurd on every level. There are no checks and balances in this system. FYI, there's something called the influence continuum. The influence continuum was written by Stephen Hassan, and it details destructive and unhealthy influence and constructive or healthy influence. Now, in an organization that is destructive and unhealthy, you would find elitism, authoritarian structure that can't be questioned, deceptive or manipulative. If you didn't see part 1, we're listening to Jeffrey Jackson lie, blatantly flat out lie. Now, I don't know that we've heard a blatant flat out lie in this part, but in the last one, he did. He flat out lied to people. And how did he justify that? Through something called theocratic warfare. Lying, manipulating, cheating, it's all justified if it's in service to Jehovah. And who speaks for Jehovah? Jeffrey Jackson does. If it's in Jeffrey Jackson's own interests, lying is acceptable. That's how they justify their deceptive, manipulative behavior. They clone people. They have an ends justify the means mentality. They preserve their own power. There are no legitimate reasons to leave. These are destructive or unhealthy forms of influence coming from organizations. Constructive or healthy influence coming out of an organization would promote egalitarianism or equality, checks and balances, informed consent, individuality and diversity. The means create an end, not ends justify the means. Encourages growth. You're free to leave any time. You can see where Jehovah's Witnesses fall on this structure, right? Now, they want to say, that's just what Jehovah wants, and I speak for Jehovah. Well, okay. But you're going to have to admit that you operate a destructive organization, at least.
It's the governing body. Is that right?
Ultimately, as guardians of our doctrine and beliefs, yes, some central group needs to make that decision, but that doesn't mean to say that we just on our own unilaterally make those decisions without research and input from others.
Interesting. They do make those final decisions without research and input. I mean, I guess people submit briefs to them to explain their positions on something, but it's not normal Jehovah's Witnesses that get to argue those positions. And if somebody comes in and says, I think you're wrong on shunning, doesn't matter who it is, they're getting disfellowshipped. Matter of fact, there's a guy named, oh my God, what's his name? Ferruli is his last name. I can't remember his first name, but he's almost like a Jehovah's Witness celebrity within the religion, right? He's been in the religion for a long, long time as like one of their best known researchers. And he released a book not too long ago detailing why Jehovah's Witnesses were incorrect on the temple fell in 607 BCE position. It didn't. It fell in 587. He detailed why they were wrong on that position. And you know what happened? He got disfellowshipped. They disfellowshipped him for apostasy. So sure, I guess he can sit here and say that they accept input from others, but if that input contradicts what they already believe, then they get disfellowshipped. Simple as that.
Could I ask you to look now at paragraph 4 on that page? It says the governing body gives final approval for new publications as well as new audio and video programs. I understand that comes very much under the responsibility of the writing committee, is that right?
That is correct.
This is before COVID. Boy, imagine if somebody had been coughing like that in a courtroom now, or whatever it is. Yeah, that wouldn't be pretty, that's for sure.
And in paragraph 5, the governing body cares for the appointment and deletion of branch and country committee members and designates the brother who will serve as the coordinator of the committee. I take it that is the manner in which things are done.
That is correct.
Now, returning to the question of publications, where it says there in paragraph 4 that the governing body approves publications, does that include the Awake and Watchtower publications?
Yes, that does. But may I explain? You see, we have a proofreading department that obviously reads everything before it's printed, and they are responsible to make sure grammatically everything is correct.
Yeah, when they say grammatically correct, the reason they have a proofreading department is because they want to make sure verbiage is exact in their propaganda. Because if it's off even by like a single word in some spot, then it could maybe distort the message Jehovah wants them to portray or whatever. That's the way they view it. By the way, I just have to say this. Every time I say the name Jehovah, I have to point out Jehovah is not God's name. It's a fabrication and a distortion. God's name in the Bible is actually Yahweh, not Jehovah. J's didn't exist until the 1400s. So just want to put that on record.
Compositors who compose the magazines. We have a lot of people working on various things. The role of the governing body, and my role as a member of the governing body, is to read each of those publications, looking to see if it does harmonize the scriptures or not. I have no idea with the Awake magazine. It may be talking about some technical issue that involves areas that I know nothing of. But the main thing for me to read it is...
Right, the Awake is usually... I think they discontinued the Awake. I'm not really sure now, but the Awake is generally viewed as like the magazine that's used to propagandize to people specifically. Like, it's supposed to be more interesting to individuals that are outside the religion rather than people that are on the inside. The Watchtower is designed for people inside the religion. It's more religious than, the Awake is. That's why he made that distinction.
Is it translatable? And does it match what the Bible says?
And are those publications, I withdraw that, do those publications which require approval of the governing body include the manuals such as Shepherd the Flock of God, Organized to do Jehovah's Work, and this branch organization manual we're looking at?
Yes, again, but with the proviso that we do not write those manuals. Those that are involved with that aspect of our work write them. They do the research that's necessary. Then the governing body finally reads it to make sure not that the policy can work in every aspect, because obviously we're not familiar with all those various aspects of the issue, but to make sure scripturally nothing is wrong.
But I take it the governing body takes responsibility for those publications.
We do take spiritual responsibility for it, yes.
Here's something interesting. He says he checks it to make sure nothing is wrong or contradicted by Scripture or whatever. Here's why what he's saying right now is absolutely absurd. Jehovah's Witnesses have this position against birthdays, right? Not allowed to celebrate birthdays. Now, what reason do they cite? They cite a number of different reasons, but it really boils down to this. Anytime the Bible mentions a birthday or anybody has a birthday party or whatever in the Bible, somebody loses a head. Like John the Baptist lost his head, or they intended to cut his head off, or somebody's birthday, they wanted his head or something like that. I don't even remember now. Anytime birthdays are mentioned, it's in a negative light. Is that sound reasoning? Jehovah's Witnesses don't even believe that's sound reasoning, because the exact same situation plays out in the Bible over pet dogs. Anytime a dog is mentioned in the Bible, it's in a negative light. If they really believed that, the Bible mentioning something in a negative light was enough to not do that thing or take part in that activity or whatever, Jehovah's Witnesses wouldn't have pet dogs. It's not about logic. It's about, holding this position or this belief and working backwards to find a way to justify it. That's basically what it's about. So is there something wrong with what was written? The Bible may not explicitly condemn or call out what they put in there, but it doesn't mean it's correct scripturally. Stampede 122, I can almost feel the claws closing in on JW governing body members. I know, right? It's fantastic. Every time I hear Jehovah, my mind substitutes the governing body. That's pretty much it. Yeah, that's pretty much what it's about. There's no reason to believe that these people have any idea what they're talking about or that they talk to God or any of that. But they want you to believe that, they're special. So
Responsibility for those publications.
We do take spiritual responsibility for it, yes. May I just mention, if there's a printing mistake and we say that penguins are found in the middle of Australia, then yes, it's true we take responsibility, but it's not within the realms of our expertise. But we would check to see who it was that had given that wrong information.
And the publications that are referred to in paragraph 4, would that include the letters to elders or the letters to the bodies of elders around the world?
If it's signed on behalf of the governing body, yes, but there are hundreds of letters that are sent out by service departments that aren't necessarily coming from the governing body.
Well, I should have been clearer, Mr. Jackson. I'm referring to the standard letters to bodies of elders dealing with general matters in a normative way, not particular letters dealing perhaps with a specific issue that's arisen here or there.
True, Mr. Stewart, but it's very rare for a congregation to receive a letter from the governing body signed by the governing body.
Signed by the governing body, maybe, but it says the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses. It is supposed to be from the governing body. They sign letters to the governing body all the time. Or they sign letters from the governing body all the time.
What will happen is a template may be approved of the basic principles and so on, but branches are allowed in many cases to make adjustments according to their local circumstances. Not adjustments to scriptural things, they would need to get back to us on that, but adjustments for local circumstances.
Those adjustments themselves, though, are adjustments which require approval of of Bethel in New York. Is that not right?
Right, Bethel is their cult compound. I actually infiltrated their compound one time, and it was disturbing.
I would beg to differ on that with all respect. Sorry.
What was that? The end of the statement? It sounded like it got cut off, and they was just sitting there.
Sorry, Mr. Stewart, do you need me to stop?
No, carry on.
Okay. You can hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, again, we're talking about a wide range of letters. Letters that are signed by the governing body, yes, definitely. But letters...
You see, the reason that this is relevant right now, letters to the governing body or from the governing body or whatever else, the reason that this is even being brought up is because the governing body wrote letters specifically to congregations to assist in covering up CSA, to assist in covering up mistreatment of children. Those letters came from the governing body. They were signed by the governing body. And, he's trying to play coy here and pretend that, every letter that's signed a governing body doesn't mean that it was actually from the governing body. Maybe it was direction from somebody else, blah, blah, blah. That's why they're going down this route in the first place. Like, obviously, it's all completely made up, and he's trying to wiggle himself out of a little hole here, basically, is the situation.
Policy letters may be adjusted locally.
I'm probably going to end up cutting out empty space if there is, if there's a whole lot of it.
Would it help if I gave you an example?
Yes, Mr. Jackson.
So, in many countries in the world, Jehovah's Witnesses, in their preaching work, if they meet someone who is interested in hearing the message, they may note down their particulars and then return and visit them later. But in some countries, that is not a legal thing that you're allowed to do. It's viewed as an invasion of privacy. So if a letter were to go out that discussed some of those aspects, we would expect the local branch would make the necessary adjustments so that it was appropriate for those countries.
Perhaps I can show you an example, Mr. Jackson, if you can be shown.
Yeah, this is interesting that he brought that up. Jehovah's Witnesses are no longer allowed to, track people whose doors they visit. They used to do that in certain countries. They still do that in the United States, and I did that when I was little. I'd write down the name and their house number and whether or not they were interested, what they were, man or woman or whatever else. And they can't do that in many countries anymore because of, the GDPR, I think, is what caused this whole hang-up. And they were specifically instructed that they were legally obligated to stop tracking data from people's houses and remove them from their lists or rolls or whatever, unless they explicitly ask the person, is it okay if I blah, blah, blah? No one's going to do that, obviously. But you can't keep data on somebody against their will or without their knowledge anymore in Europe. In the U.S., you still can.
Perhaps I can show you an example, Mr. Jackson, if you can be shown from the tender bundle, tab 94.
Again, I'm probably going to cut out empty space. If you see a fade or a transition of some sort, inexplicably, it's just I'm cutting out empty space. I'm not going to cut anything that they say that's relevant or whatever.
I have it here in front of me.
Have you had the opportunity, Mr. Jackson, to view this correspondence previously?
No, I haven't. It's from, I believe, 1998, is it? Well before my time on the governing body.
Right. He was in the last one. He talked about how he came to the governing body in 2005.
I'm referring to the last week, Mr. Jackson. Have you had the opportunity to look at this correspondence?
I've been caring for my father. I wish I could have had time to prepare properly, but I haven't been able to. And I assume the Commission was wanting to know what I could contribute personally from my experience. So,
apparently, according to somebody who was telling me this, I think in the comments recently, so take it with a grain of salt, but I believe that the governing body was doing everything that they could to avoid testifying at this thing. They were ignoring them. They were ducking them. Jeffrey Jackson, is obviously from Australia, and he was visiting his dad, and they knew he was in the country, so they grabbed him. They nabbed him before he could leave and said, "You're going to testify in front of us since you're in the country." So that's kind of interesting.
No, I haven't had a chance to read all these.
Yes, well, I'll take you through it, Mr. Jackson. You'll see this. This is a letter in April 1998 from the Australia branch to the governing body service committee. Now, I understand, of course, you're not on the service committee, but you'll see.
Yeah, Jehovah's Witnesses, FYI, would under no circumstances ever willingly testify in something like this. They wouldn't do it if they had any choice about it. Jeffrey Jackson, especially governing body members, they don't cooperate with outside authorities ever. Ever. So it should tell you something about the fact that he's here right now doing this. It was not a willing thing.
The service committee. Now, I understand, of course, you're not on the service committee, but you'll see that Australia branch says we are replying now to your letter, and it's referenced concerning the possibility of putting something in writing on the subject of confidentiality and the law in relation to child abuse matters. We appreciate the opinion of the writing and service committees, and we thank you for the opportunity to comment further. We're sorry to be so long in replying, and so on. And then in the next paragraph, up till now, the brothers generally expect that the elders will keep all matters confidential. Since this has been stressed a number of times, in Australia it has happened that some elders have been prepared to accept punishment for contempt of court rather than disclose confidential information.
Are you catching this? This is a big fucking deal right here, what he's reading. We need to listen to this one more time. I believe they're reading from a letter directly from the governing body members. Listen to this again. This is really, really important. This is the crux of the whole thing, okay?
Through it, Mr. Jackson. You'll see this. This is a letter in April 1998 from the Australia branch to the governing body service committee. Now, I understand, of course, you're not on the service committee, but you'll see that Australia branch says we are replying now to your letter, and it's referenced concerning the possibility of putting something in writing on the subject of confidentiality and the law in relation to child abuse matters.
So they're putting something on record in relation to the law and child abuse matters. Okay?
Putting something in writing on the subject of confidentiality and the law in relation to child abuse matters. We appreciate the opinion of the writing and service committees, and we thank you for the opportunity to comment further. We're sorry to be so long in replying, and so on. And then in the next paragraph, up till now, the brothers generally expect that the elders will keep all matters confidential. Since this
up to now, it's expected that, elders will keep everything confidential. They find out that a kid is being abused in a congregation. They don't say a word to anybody under any circumstances. They keep it zipped. That's their position up to this moment, right? In 1998 is when this happened. By the way, Jehovah's Witnesses, as a direct result of their positions here, have been sued into oblivion over this. Like, it's crazy. They have lost lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit over all of this because of their positions, because the elders knew something was happening and did not call the police. They didn't call the cops, despite being aware that this abuse took place because of something called the two-witness rule. Now, the two-witness rule is a complicated thing. Basically, it was in the Bible originally. It was intended to manage, like, contracts and stuff. You want to sell a donkey to somebody, you have to have two witnesses there to witness the trading of money and goods. Or it's like it didn't happen because video cameras didn't exist at the time, right? That was a two-witness rule back in the day. Now, Jehovah's Witnesses have co-opted the two-witness rule to apply to legal matters, not just civil matters like contracts, but legal matters also, like child abuse, for example. Somebody is committing CSA, there have to be two victims or two witnesses to the CSA, or it's like it never happened. Now, Jehovah's Witnesses famously like to keep to themselves and not involve secular authorities at all. So if there aren't two witnesses or two victims, it's like it never happened. And if there's one thing that you can be sure about when it comes to people who abuse children, it's that they find every loophole they can to continue doing what they do. Naturally, people realized, hey, if I just take advantage of one kid in this congregation and then move to another congregation, it's like it never happened. They're not allowed to tell the other congregation because there weren't two witnesses or two victims. So I'll take advantage of this one kid, and then I will move to another congregation, and they won't say a word to them, and then I'll take advantage of another kid. And this happened over and over and over and over and over again. Who knows how many times? We don't know. You know who does know, though? The governing body knows. Because eventually they got sued into oblivion for this, had to pay hundreds of millions of dollars, and now they changed their rule to, instead of saying nothing to anybody if there's a single, if there's just one victim, now you say nothing to anybody except for us. Call our lawyers and tell us what happened, and then say nothing to anybody. And eventually it changed from that position to, you can tell them they can call the police if they choose, but you don't call the police as an elder. You will not call the cops. You won't be involved in any of this. You just tell them it's their choice, and it won't affect their spiritual life one way or another if they choose to call the cops. That's what it changed to back in, 2019 or so. That was the correction. That was the correction to the problem. There was an issue. They were called in front of the Australian Royal Commission, and to correct that problem, they said, people can call the cops if they want, but that's not your responsibility as an elder. So here we have the Australian Royal Commission very clearly outlining the issue. The governing body specifically instructed people not to call the police, not get involved like that. Listen again.
From the Australia branch to the governing body service committee. Now, I understand, of course, you're not on the service committee, but you'll see that Australia branch says we are replying now to your letter, and it's referenced concerning the possibility of putting something in writing on the subject of confidentiality and the law in relation to child abuse matters. We appreciate the opinion of the writing and service committees, and we thank you for the opportunity to comment further. We're sorry to be so long in replying, and so on. And then in the next paragraph, up till now, the brothers generally expect that the elders will keep all matters confidential, since this is...
Right. It says, up to now, it was expected that they would keep all matters confidential, right? I.e., don't tell the police. Don't tell anybody at all. Keep it zipped.
Up till now, the brothers generally expect that the elders will keep all matters confidential, since this has been stressed a number of times. In Australia, it has happened that some elders have been prepared to accept punishment for contempt of court rather than disclose confidential information.
So you will accept contempt of court and be sent to jail before helping an abuse victim, before testifying and contributing and assisting people who have been taken advantage of by people in your congregation.
However, we are now saying that elders should comply with the law where mandatory reporting is required if there is no exemption available to them.
So if you are forced by law and you're going to go to jail, cooperate if there's absolutely no other choice. Not call the police if you hear about this. Not report it. Send this information to the proper authorities. No, it's if you are absolutely required and there's no way out of this situation for you, I guess before going to jail, tell somebody.
To accept punishment for contempt of court rather than disclose confidential information. However, we are now saying that elders should comply with the law where mandatory reporting is required if there is no exemption available to them. And then in the next paragraph, it has been suggested that the following be printed in a question box in our Kingdom ministry. It would be necessary to schedule it as part of the service meeting program unless we simply ask the presiding overseer or another elder simply to read the question and answer in the announcement part of the meeting.
Right. So the Kingdom ministry he just mentioned there, I'll step back, we'll listen again with this context. The Kingdom ministry is like a little 4-page document that you get when you become an unbaptized publisher, which means like you're allowed to knock on doors and stuff. And it's official announcements for official Jehovah's Witnesses. It's not something that just anybody has access to. So they're saying that they're going to put an announcement in the Kingdom ministry for Jehovah's Witnesses and Jehovah's Witnesses only, okay? Keep listening here.
Next paragraph, it has been suggested that the following be printed in a question box in our Kingdom ministry. It it would be necessary to schedule it as part of the service meeting program unless we simply ask the presiding overseer or another elder simply to read the question and answer in the announcement part of the meeting.
So they're detailing how they're going to announce a change, basically. When you go to a meeting, they're going to read an announcement, in front of the congregation, basically, and that announcement's coming from the Kingdom Ministry.
And then what is proposed is set out. Do you see that?
Yes, I see that.
And then you'll see there's a reply to that letter at tab 96.
Right. So that letter, I guess, was sent to the governing body members as a proposed change, as something that should be done. Okay? And now the governing body responds to how, to that proposed change, I guess, is what's happening here. I'm a little bit confused. I'm trying to follow what's happening here, but I think that's what he's saying. The governing body responded to that proposed change, and he's about to read the letter that they sent about it.
On the 24th of July, 1998.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Right, shortly after that letter was received.
I see that.
You'll see at the foot of the page, it's from the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of Pennsylvania for the Service Committee.
This is a long time ago, 1998, right? And it's before this guy was even on the governing body, as he pointed out. He came in 2005. But this policy is still in place. And he is one of 8 people at this time, 9 now, I think, who were capable of changing it. Did he? Of course not. Of course he didn't change it. He didn't do shit. And as a result, they ended up paying out millions, tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions in lawsuits because he had the ability to change it but chose not to.
And it references the letter of 28 April 1998, referring to the suggestion for a possible question and box in the edition of Our Kingdom Ministry. And then it says, after carefully considering the matter, it has been concluded that if the branch committee in Australia continues to recommend publishing the suggested material, then it would be appropriate for the branch to feature the suggested question and answer as outlined in your letter. It will not be necessary to schedule the information to be considered on a service meeting program. We'll leave it to the brothers to read the information presented. Now, what that suggests, and I'm providing you with the...
So they basically said, if you... I understand that you want to put a little note in the Kingdom Ministry about, if you are in a tough position and you're about to be charged with contempt of court for not telling people about abuse, then I guess if you're going to be charged with a crime for not reporting it, then I guess report it. Like if you're in a courtroom situation. They wanted to put one little note in there for the elders to be aware. And I guess the governing body said, okay, in their response, but only in Australia.
The opportunity to comment on this or answer it, Mr. Jackson. What that suggests is that even matters of that detail are, firstly, as a matter of practice, put to Bethel in New York for approval, and secondly, require such approval or consent.
This particular instance, obviously, the brothers in Australia wrote to the service committee. But if I could just mention, the importance of this to us is that the governing body gives direction with regard to the church services or the congregation meetings of Jehovah's Witnesses. And this, I assume, and this is the first time I've seen the document, is asking if they can include this in the actual program at the Kingdom Halls. And
you know why this is the first time he's seen the document? Because he refuses to listen to anybody else. People have been talking about how absolutely disgusting and crooked it is that they handle CSA cases the way that they do for decades. Okay, this has been happening since the 1980s at least. This has been like the focus of the criticisms against the organization. And instead of just correcting it, instead of listening to what people had to say, instead of doing any of that, they hide their head in the sand. They avoid people at all costs. They lie. They twist things around. They refuse to show up to court. They avoid going to countries that they know might, subpoena them to talk on subjects or whatever other thing. They avoid it at all costs. The reason he hasn't heard this up to now is because he has avoided hearing it, whatever it took.
And I assume from what's said here, the governing body has, or the service committee of the governing body has given direction on that. But if I can highlight, the reason for that is it involves our spiritual programs.
And now it sounds like he's backing out of his position and saying, I mean, the governing body doesn't really even do anything. We just tell people how, like, meetings should be run. We don't have anything to do with any of the other stuff. Complete nonsense, obviously. How does he expect anybody to believe this? This is a blatant lie. He took an oath to Jehovah God himself, put his hand on his Bible, looked somebody in the eye and said, I swear to Jehovah God himself, I will tell you the truth in this. The guy's lying. This is a kill shot for Jehovah's Witness organization. Now, if you're an outsider, you may not fully understand the significance of what just happened because you don't have, like, the cultural context behind it to understand, like, how these people are just twisting things around and lying. A governing body member lying to people's faces like this. You may not fully understand the cultural context, but Jehovah's Witnesses do. And that's why this is such a valuable thing to watch, because we can see with our own eyes now how crooked the governing body is, how they don't care about lying. Never did. Matter of fact, they're willing to lie if it's going to benefit them in some way. Under oath, put their hand on their Bible and swear to Jehovah, and they're still willing to lie. That is some shit right there.
Now, in making decisions on the publications, I understand from what you say is that you're guided by the scriptures.
That is correct.
And that involves, obviously, interpreting the scriptures from time to time.
That is the role of the governing body.
And am I right in understanding that the governing body's interpretation of the scriptures on any particular point might change or develop from time to time?
Yes, it's called new light. That's what they call it. And it's basically when they used to hold a position and then they completely flipped. In the United States, every regulation that exists was paid for in blood. There are regulations with companies that say you can't store plutonium next to the break room, right? If you're working at, like, a nuclear plant or something. You know why that regulation is there? Because somebody died. They got cancer because somebody at that company was storing plutonium next to a break room. Every regulation was paid for in blood. Every time Jehovah's Witnesses make a change, like the governing body makes a change to their organization like this, people died under the old rule, under the old regime or whatever. And changing it to more closely match what they believe the Bible says, even though they're not even following the Bible really, is just disgusting on so many levels. I mean, they need to change it, right? But they're changing the wrong things. By and large, they only change things that they're legally obligated to change, or they'll go to jail, or they'll be banned from the country. Like, they were banned from Russia for being an extremist organization. They were banned as a religion from Norway, I think. They're allowed to practice, but they're not going to be allowed to get government grants or have protection as a religion under the government anymore because of their bad behavior.
That is correct as well.
So I think some examples might be, for example, firstly, the question of blood fractions and whether that is or isn't covered by the prohibition for the receipt of blood transfusions.
This is a perfect example of what I was talking about, their position on blood transfusions, right? Every rule was paid for in blood. People died because they held this position on blood transfusions. They believed that people should not receive blood transfusions. And he talked about blood fractions just now. That gets complicated. Now, the verse that they use to justify their position on blood transfusions is in Leviticus, I believe, and it basically says you're not allowed to eat blood. Now, if you look at the verbiage, the word used in that verse, it says eat. And if you translate it, the original word meant to devour through your mouth and into your stomach. That's what it actually meant, that word. The reason that there was that rule about not eating blood, like in food that you cook, for example, you must drain it properly, is because in Israel, like, the ancient Jews, when they were living their lives or whatever, their rabbis were also the doctors. And they tried to limit things that spread disease. That's also why you're not allowed to eat pork. Because pork, if it's not cooked properly, will cause disturbing problems for you. Disturbing problems. Like parasites and stuff. So they prohibited eating blood. It was important to drain the meat properly before eating it, right? And blood, as we know, is full of pathogens. Well, Jehovah's Witnesses reinterpreted that position, that verse, to mean you're not allowed to take a life-saving medical treatment if you need it. That's very different from not eating blood. At no point in the entire Bible did God ever actually demand a human sacrifice. And that's what that is, human sacrifice. You are required to give your life for God. Now, there are actually 3 examples of human sacrifice in the Bible. So I guess it's not fair to say there are no examples, but it wasn't a regular part of worship, which is what Jehovah's Witnesses have turned it into. The 3 examples of human sacrifice in the Bible were Jesus, although that's arguable. And then there's Isaac and Abraham, right? Abraham was told to sacrifice his son, and then God called it off at the last second. So, again, arguable. And then the third one was a guy named Jephthah. He said, God, if you help me win this war against whoever he's fighting, the Midianites maybe, I will sacrifice the first thing that comes out to greet me when I come home from the war. And he was thinking, it's going to be the dog. Like, I don't give a fuck about the dog. Just, let him die, whatever. It turned out to be his daughter. And his daughter went into the mountains, before she died for months to kind of enjoy life, apparently. And, and then she was sacrificed to God. Those are the only examples of human sacrifice in the Bible. Now, as a regular part of worship, human sacrifice was never required. But that's what's happening right now. They're requiring human sacrifice. And they even Jehovah's Witnesses, they put a little thing in there in their watchtowers back in the day that basically showed all of the loyal worshipers of Jehovah who gave their lives in service of God by not taking a blood transfusion and dying. They realized how deeply, tacky isn't even the right word for it, is it? How grotesque and morbid it was to list people who sacrificed their lives for the organization, and they stopped doing that after a while. We don't know exactly how many people have died from this. We know it's in the thousands, many, many thousands, simply because of the awakes and watchtowers that they released with the people's names. Like back in the 80s, I think. Anyways, the guy mentioned blood fractions a minute ago, so Jehovah's Witnesses are strictly forbidden from taking blood transfusions in the event they need it. But taking blood fractions, like medicines that were derived from blood, like people withdrew plasma from others and studied it and created medicines out of it, that's a conscience matter, they say. We're warning you. You may not make it to heaven if you choose, or you may not make it to the paradise if you choose to take this medicine based on blood fractions, but we don't know for sure, so we're leaving it up to you. That's basically what was said. That's why he's bringing up blood fractions here. So let's continue listening now that you have that context.
For example, firstly, the question of blood fractions and whether that is or isn't covered by the prohibition for the receipt of blood transfusions.
I find it fascinating that they say it's a conscience matter, you know, taking medicine derived from blood fractions or whatever, when they're supposed to be able to talk to God, right? Why don't they just ask God? I don't understand. It's so weird. Can you talk to God or not, right?
That is correct as well, but if I could just mention, when blood transfusions were first introduced, there wasn't a lot of options with regard to blood fractions.
Yes, but my point is, or what I'm seeking to understand, is there was an interpretation at one point which said that members of the Jehovah's Witnesses should not receive blood fractions, but in more recent times it's been accepted, as I understand it, that there's no specific scriptural direction on that, so on blood fractions, that is, so that's a matter for the individual conscience of Jehovah's Witnesses.
That's correct, but they speak to Jehovah. Can't they just get this information directly from him? And also, there's no scriptural direction on blood transfusions either. Needles didn't even exist back then. I mean, hypodermic needles didn't exist at the time. So why are they confident enough to let thousands of people die, tens, hundreds of thousands of people die, over something that is very obviously not in the Bible, but they're more hesitant when it comes to blood fractions? Like, give me a break.
That's right. And Mr. Stewart, if I may mention, this is an example of the desire of the governing body not to go beyond the scriptures. Clearly, we have the direction in Acts chapter 15, 28 and 29 against blood. But if I could also mention, you see, as with anything in the community, more and more knowledge becomes available medically. It can be very overwhelming trying to see all the latest medical research and so on. But the governing body tries to make sure that they don't go beyond what is written. If we see that a direction from the scriptures has perhaps been used too broadly, then we're the first ones to try to correct that.
No, they aren't. They're not the first ones to try to correct it. They have never tried to correct their garbage. Usually when new light comes out, quote unquote, new light, Jehovah is expanding the information so they know more. Usually when that happens, God, I can't talk while I'm deflecting a laser. Usually when that happens, it's making things even worse, more regressive. Why do they even have to do this in the first place? Why can't they just allow people to get blood transfusions? Like, what's the big deal? I don't understand. Why do they care? It said eating blood was wrong, not getting blood injected into you through a hypodermic needle to save your life. God in the Bible, or the Christian God, the one represented by Jesus, valued life over everything. Everything. What makes them think that they're right about this? It does not make any sense. See, I'm talking again. That's why I can't deflect. It doesn't make any sense at all.
And I take it too that the state of knowledge about the scriptures, and in particular historical knowledge about scriptures, also improves or increases from time to time.
Did you see that shit? That was fucking metal. I just deflected both blasts simultaneously. That was crazy. Wow. Okay. That's awesome. I'm really proud of that.
Historical knowledge about scriptures also improves or increases from time to time.
Right. Historical knowledge about scriptures increases and improves over time, and that makes the picture clearer. I thought they talked to God. I thought God sent them messages directly into their brain. What happened to that?
That is correct. But there are some basic things in the Bible that have not changed right from the beginnings of the Jehovah's Witness religion. And I won't take your time, obviously, going through those, but it is important to realize what are basic things in the Bible. For example, is the Bible from God? That there is no possibility of us changing our viewpoint on that.
Mr. Jackson, You probably know that we discussed with some of your members earlier in this hearing the relationship of the Bible being written at a time of particular political and social structure and its literal relevance in today's social and political context. Are you familiar with those discussions?
I am. I did hear your question, Your Honour, and I at the time was quite frustrated that I didn't have an opportunity to answer. So I appear this opportunity is now coming.
I'm going to give you an opportunity. Now, it is plain that over time, in relation to matters of relevance to this Commission, our understanding, both medical, social and of the political issues that arise, has changed. And you're aware of that?
I am aware of that, Your Honour.
That's really interesting. So basically the judge, I guess is who this is saying the Bible was written during a time of very specific political strife with specific political things going on, and thus put emphasis on specific political positions that were relevant at that time. Like I said with the rabbis, right? The context behind not eating blood was the rabbis were the doctors, and blood carried pathogen at the time. Still does, but we can filter that out pretty well now. So the best they could do was say, don't eat blood or you risk spreading pathogens. That's a very specific context in which you shouldn't be eating blood. That context is gone now because we have like scanning equipment and tests, and it saves thousands of people's lives, tens or hundreds of thousands every year. I don't have any idea how many people it saves every year worldwide, but a lot anyway. That's a really interesting point by the judge, and a point that goes right over the head of the governing body members. They don't even care. The political context at the time it was written is irrelevant.